Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from Montreal in Canada is somebody who's not really from there, but lives there, Kaisa Martiskainen. Hey, Kaisa, welcome to the show.
Hey, Vasco. Thanks for having me.
So Kaisa is an agile coach working for a large multinational company, originally from Finland, which is a coincidence because I live in Finland right now. Her thirst for learning new things and passion for languages led her to live in Sweden and Scotland before settling in Montreal, Canada. She's an avid Redditor who spends her free time reading, knitting, investing, and playing with her two daughters. So, Kaisa, that was a short intro. Take a minute. Tell us a bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Sure. So since I was young, I was really interested in languages, and that's a domain I was always aiming at working in. So I started my university studies in Scotland, where I studied languages and film. And because French was one of those languages that I was studying, I kind of created an opportunity for myself to spend a year in Montreal in Canada, where French is the official language. So I ended up loving the Montreal vibe so much that I transferred from my Scottish university to a university in Montreal and finished my studies in French literature there, or here rather. While I was still studying, I got a job doing localization QA for video games, which was a nice combination of my preferred domain, which was languages, mixed with a bit of technology. So this was the first time I heard about Agile, because sometimes I was able to interact with our clients that were video game companies, and many of their game development teams were working in Agile. So after that work experience, I never went back to strictly working with languages, but instead I continued working in video games and later at tech startups, always in Agile teams, but in different roles. And I feel so fortunate that I was able to start my career completely immersed in Agile. It's as if I was a fish and Agile was water. And the best thing is that, the best thing is that nobody was really teaching me and saying, like, hey, kid, this thing that you're swimming in is water. Or that, like, this thing that we do is Agile, and here's the manual, here's how you do it. Instead, I just learned by adopting the values of the team that I worked in. And I mean, obviously, some of those teams were more agile than others, but at that point, I didn't really know anything about that. So I went through a period of several years when I was frequently changing jobs and trying out different things to accelerate my learning in tech and in IT. And that's when I also did a certificate in front-end development. So I moved into a developer role for a bit, but soon after I went back to doing QA. And this is when I started looking at Agile on a deeper level to try to understand what it was all about. So having been in so many different teams and different companies that were all working in Agile, more or less, I was suddenly noticing patterns that were emerging, as well as some major differences in how the teams and individuals behaved. So there were some teams where people were laser focused on the Agile practices and doing them a certain way. But at the same time, those teams weren't necessarily that flexible in their response to change, whereas there were other teams that had a mindset that was very agile, but they didn't necessarily follow the practices religiously. And then you had everything in between. So I thought to myself, wow, this is really interesting. So while I was still working as QA, my team would often rotate the Scrum Master role so that everyone in the development team could be a Scrum Master for a sprint or two. And that was my first experience actually wearing that hat. And I really loved it. And at one point, I finally found a great company and a position that I wanted to stay in. And after a couple of years in that position, myself and a colleague started driving an initiative internally that promoted agile ways of working. And through that initiative, and by having an amazingly supportive manager, I was able to finally transition to the Scrum Master role. And now I've been with my current company for around 6 years. And around a year and a half ago, I became an agile coach.
Very good. Very good. Well, definitely, I can imagine how it feels perhaps for you right now, hearing about those old ways of working that weren't agile, because I mean, you were born in an agile universe already, right? Like, of course,
Right.
figuratively speaking. And of course, there's a lot of advantages to that. I mean, if I look at my own career, I spent the best part of a decade working in waterfall projects, so I can definitely see the advantage of being born into the world of work already in an agile context. But
Right.
of course, you also, like, over time, I'm sure you started to see the contrasts, right? Like, because I imagine that not in all companies everything was agile the same way, and perhaps there were other people who had a different background. So we want to explore maybe a story like that, but like a story of failure, right? Like, because when we start adopting agile, whether it's just the native way of doing or whether it's a new and different way of doing, we always have moments of difficulty as Scrum Masters. And that's one of those moments that we want to explore, Kaisa. So tell us a little bit more about a moment where you, as a Scrum Master, you did your best, but as it happens, that at that time, the best just wasn't good enough.
Absolutely. So I have so many stories to choose from, actually. And I think the one that I have in mind is a really common one for Scrum Masters out there, especially Scrum Master at the very beginning of their journey. So this was when I was working as a Scrum Master for the very first time. And I was so eager to be a good Scrum Master, but I just ended up becoming this helicopter parent to the development team.
How
So
did
as I
that look
said, I was
like?
new to the
How,
role.
how, how did you do that? Like, what is it in practice being a helicopter Scrum Master?
Right. So, I mean, I became the team's secretary. So I was planning, scheduling, and running all the meetings. I saw every problem that the team had as an impediment that I needed to remove. And also, and I think this was the worst part of it, I was acting as a messenger in the communications between the PO and the development team. So the team had not been working together for a very long time, and I think many of the people were also new to agile. So the relationship that the PO and the development team should ideally have, it it just wasn't there, and the developers didn't feel comfortable necessarily with the communication style that the PO had. He was quite direct in a lot of his communications, and that's why the team, they weren't really comfortable asking the PO questions or maybe commenting on things or voicing their concerns, whereas they were much more comfortable speaking with me. So they kind of bypassed that important bit where they should have had the conversation with the PO and instead gave their feedback to me. And because I was so eager to help and make things work, I sort of I didn't help them create that conversation, but instead I was adding this band-aid to this wound that wasn't really helping at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally see the temptation as well for Scrum Masters, especially in the beginning of their journey, to kind of step in and help in everything, right? And as we learn, as we become more experienced and perhaps take a bit more of a coaching stance, we start to kind of step back a little bit more and let the team also experience difficulties, because that's how also they grow and they get the motivation to grow.
Right.
Now that you have a lot more experience, guys, when you look back at that story, what do you wish you would have done at that time to help the team and the product owner work better together?
So I think now when I think about that, instead of jumping in to rescue the team or a certain individual, I would have maybe paused and asked some questions. So when the team expresses that they need help with something or that something needs to be done, instead of saying, I'll do it, I'll absolutely do it, I can do it, it's easy, I would instead ask, who is in the best position to do this, actually? Because most likely it's not me. Instead, it will be the team, it will be some individual in the team, or it might be someone else. But in most cases, the best person to make some kind of decision or anything else to solve some kind of a problem, it's not me. And as for the communication issues, actually we had to have kind of like a separate retrospective to discuss the feelings that the people had on the team, about the PO, about maybe each other. And while it was difficult in that moment for everyone to actually give that feedback, so the team actually had to say that they were not feeling comfortable asking questions from the PO in the presence of the PO. So while it was difficult in the moment, I think everyone felt a sense of relief after all this feedback came out and after we had that conversation. And also kind of to build that relationship, we started having regular virtual happy hours during work time, but kind of like apart from work. So the team and the PO were there, and we decided that we wouldn't discuss work at all, but we would only talk about kind of personal things, and we would play games and do team building activities. And I think this really helped strengthen the interpersonal relationships in the team and the relationship with the PO and the developers.
And this is even more important if we work in a remote environment like many of us work these days, right? After Corona, a lot of the teams are fully remote or mostly remote. And if we don't have the opportunity to have this maybe, very little structure kind of interaction on what you said, like, about ourselves or playing games or discussing other topics, then it's very hard to build that personal relationship that makes it easy to take the initiative to contact someone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I feel like these kind of, if you're just communicating on calls or emails or through Slack messages, a lot of things can get lost, and the communication maybe doesn't come out the way someone means it to come out. So that also adds to these difficulties in interpersonal relationships within a team.
Absolutely. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us, Kaisa.
Thank you, Vasco.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.